focus on both global perspective as well as our local situation here in Nigeria. So basically, this is the background for our conversation this afternoon. Now, so what are the core ethical principles that we find in mediation? Ethical principles form the foundation of effective and trustworthy mediation practice. These principles guide mediators in ensuring fairness, transparency, and respect for all parties involved. And I have listed a few of them, and I'll explain them as we go along. The first and the primary principle is that of impartiality and neutrality. You cannot be a mediator if you do not have impartiality and neutrality. So mediators must remain impartial and neutral throughout the mediation process, avoiding any form of bias or favoritism towards either party. This principle ensures that all parties feel equally heard and respected, fostering an environment of trust and cooperation. Now, some people may say, is it possible to remain neutral and impartial throughout the process? Impartial throughout the process, yes. Neutrality throughout the process can sometimes be a challenge. And neutrality, the challenge with neutrality stems from the fact that the parties who come before you bring before you issues that are matters that you may also have had experience of. So it is almost impossible for the mediator not to form an opinion at some point, one way or the other, about the issues that he or she has to deal with. This is where your impartiality kicks in. So I like to discuss neutrality and impartiality as twin sisters, one at the very beginning and the other at the middle, ensuring that you remain stable and balanced throughout the process. So we cannot be effective mediators, and a mediator cannot do their work effectively without remaining impartial and neutral. The next is confidentiality. Now, this is a cornerstone of mediation, ensuring that all discussions, documents, and outcome remain private unless the parties have agreed otherwise. This principle encourages parties to open up and protect sensitive information from being disclosed outside of the mediation process. So the mediator, for instance, cannot, in a typical workplace mediation, for instance, the mediator must not share details of a workplace dispute with an employee unless, with an employer rather, unless explicitly authorized by the party. So if I've been appointed by, say, Central Bank of Nigeria to conduct a mediation between two management staff, whatever happens in that mediation remains confidential. I cannot tell their director, even though that director may have been the one who invited me and is even paying my fees in managing that particular process. So confidentiality is key and is sacrosanct as far as mediation is concerned. Then informed consent. Mediators must ensure that all parties fully understand the mediation process, their rights within the process, and the potential outcome before proceeding. Informed consent empowers parties to make voluntary and well-informed decisions about their participation in mediation. So before parties come into the process, parties need to know. Mediation is said to be a consensual process. Without consent of parties, mediation cannot work. So it is fundamental that the mediator explain the voluntary nature of the mediation process, including the right of parties to walk away if they so elect. Of course, in practice, we rarely ever say to parties, you have a right to walk away. If you do that, then you probably open the gate for them to take that opportunity at the earliest chance they get. What we normally do is to encourage parties to say it's a voluntary process. The process is non-binding. You have the opportunity to stay in it freely and reach an outcome that is beneficial to you and belongs to you. Then, of course, another principle is that of self-determination, otherwise referred to as party autonomy. Self-determination emphasizes the party's right to make their own decision without coercion or undue influence from the mediator. Mediators must respect and support the autonomy of the parties, allowing them to craft solutions that best meet their needs or their fears or concerns, as the case may be. Now, mediation cannot work if somebody else decides for the party. So one of the fundamental things that makes mediation such a beautiful process is the fact that when parties come to mediation, it is they who decide for themselves what the outcome, not a third party. So this is where mediation is fundamentally different from arbitration, which has a third-party neutral deciding, or litigation, which has a judex deciding the rights and obligations of parties therein. Then another very important principle is that of competence and professionalism. It is interesting to note that this is one particular principle that people do not highlight that much, but it's a principle that is important nonetheless. And why is it so important? Mediators must possess the necessary skills, knowledge, and training. Please underline all those words: skills, knowledge, and training to effectively facilitate the mediation process. Professionalism includes in maintaining the appropriate boundaries. Mediator must understand the boundaries that exist. For instance, there's a boundary between being a mediator, guiding the parties, and being a counselor, guiding the parties. So you must understand those boundaries. The mediator must adhere to ethical guidelines, some of which I've already mentioned and we'll talk about, and then the mediator must continuously improve his or her practice. So every one of us, for instance, who is logged in today is working hard to maintain this particular principle, which is to promote your competence and professionalism. Also, a mediator who is handling a complex commercial dispute should, for example, have expertise in the relevant industry or legal framework that they are embraced with. It will not be a shame, or it doesn't amount to you failing if you have been asked to come mediate in a sector or in an industry that you have no idea how that works. While the mediator does not necessarily need to have expertise in certain regard, some basic knowledge of how the system works can be an advantage. And if you do not manage this well, you could find yourself in a situation where you are not offering parties the best of your service and thereby not offering them the best of professionalism. So these are the core ethical principles that guide the mediation process, which as mediators, we must uphold. Then I go to speak about the universal ethical standards in mediation. Now, of course, because mediation is not just about those of us in Nigeria, mediation applies globally and is fast becoming probably the most sought after dispute resolution mechanism. To promote consistency and credibility in mediation practice globally, various organizations have established universal ethical standards and frameworks that guide us as mediators. So everywhere you practice mediation, whether it is in Nigeria, in Europe, in the US, there are ethical guidelines that guide you. And then if you practice internationally, there are also ethical guidelines that you must subscribe to and must adhere to. Some of these guidelines are the UNCITRAL Model Law on International Commercial Mediation. The United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, UNCITRAL Model Law, provides guidelines on the mediation, provides guidelines for the conduct of international commercial mediation, emphasizing principles such as confidentiality, impartiality, and party autonomy. Then, of course, we have the American Bar Association, the ABA Model Standards of Code of Conduct for Mediators, standards of conduct for mediators. The ABA's model standards provide a framework of ethical mediation practices in the United States, addressing such issues such as conflict of interest, competence, and fairness. One of the things you will find is that these principles cut across the different legal frameworks or regulatory frameworks that you find. These are the International Mediation Institute guidelines. Has developed a comprehensive set of ethical standards for mediators, including requirements for training, certification, and adherence to core principles such as neutrality and informed consent. So as a mediator, for instance, it is not enough. And when I talk with some of our colleagues, especially those whom I had the privilege of training many years ago and even recently, they say, I say, so what are you doing in your mediation practice? Oh, well, I'm practicing. When did you do any continued professional development course? I actually haven't done any in the last 2 years, 3 years. Now, by way of example, most of us who are seasoned practitioners will tell you that if you want to be on top of your game, you need to attend some sort of training, at least one training every year. What I do is to attend at least one global training, one training that gives me global, or gives my, sharpens my skills globally, and one training that sharpens my skills domestically. So training is, or certification is an important aspect of observing ethical standards. Then, of course, our own Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators, ICMC Code of Ethics. The ICMC Code of Ethics sets out a clear roadmap for the conduct of mediators and emphasizes the need for training and continuing professional education and quality addition. And that's why one of the principles that the Code of Ethics is the issue of observing or maintaining quality in terms of your knowledge. The Institute's code also emphasizes neutrality and impartiality, confidentiality, party autonomy, amongst others. And last but not the least is the European Code of Conduct for Mediators. This code outlines ethical standards for mediators operating within the EU, focusing on impartiality, confidentiality, and the voluntary nature of mediation. So if you look through all these five, and these five are just examples of what exists out there. There are so many of them. But if you look at all these five frameworks or guidelines, as the case may, or ethical standards, as the case may be, you'll find that each and every one of them is similar in the principles that it advances and in the principles that it upholds. So let's talk about some common ethical challenges that we find in our practice as mediators. What are the things that we are likely to come across? So mediation, while a powerful tool for resolving disputes, is not immune to ethical challenges. As long as they are humans and we remain human, we will always have those challenges that confront us. These issues can arise in any jurisdiction and have the potential to undermine the integrity and effectiveness of the process of mediation. Now, I'd like to talk about a few of them quickly. I've listed just a few. There could be more, but some of the prevalent ethical challenges in mediation globally are: one, power imbalance between the parties. Now, power imbalance occur when a party has significantly more resource, influence, or knowledge than the other party, creating an uneven playing field. Mediators must be very vigilant in identifying and addressing such imbalances to ensure fairness and equity. One of the ways that, of course, we have always advocated that the mediator must be vigilant in this is if you have a master-servant relationship where two people who have come to you in mediation, one is a master, one is a servant, you have to be vigilant about the power imbalance. And sometimes this is where you now may need to deploy a different strategy from the textbook approach of bringing the parties together in plenary and then before you go to caucusing. When faced with such situation, I would rather caucus first before bringing the parties together so that I can manage parties' expectation, I can manage issues of power imbalance as the case would be. And a typical example of an imbalance of powers in such a situation would be workplace disputes where an employee may feel intimidated by their employer, making it difficult for them to express their concerns openly and frankly. And once a party cannot open up and be frank about their concerns, then, of course, naturally, the ability of the mediator to assist them will be very difficult. Another one is the cultural and gender bias. Mediators must be careful to navigate cultural differences and avoid gender biases that could affect their neutrality or their parties or the participation of parties in the mediation process. Cultural misunderstandings or stereotypes can lead to unfair outcomes and perpetuate discrimination. That's why at ICMC, one of our courses that we do, especially at the CPD level and also at the fellowship level, is a discussion on cultural dilemmas in negotiation and mediation. And for those of you who have not taken that course, I'll encourage you to try and do that. You must be alive to those nuances, as the case may be. For instance, if you are from the southern part of Nigeria, you've been appointed a mediator to mediate a matter that involves people from the northern part of Nigeria. You must be aware of the cultural issues, of the gender-related issues, and so on and so forth. So an example, for instance, is where a cultural and gender bias situation is a mediator who may unconsciously favor a party from their own cultural background or assume gender roles that may influence their approach to dispute. One interesting point with regards to gender I always like to talk about is many years ago, I had a mediation where I had a co-mediator who had been appointed by the parties had appointed 2 mediators, myself and a co-mediator. And in the course of the proceedings, as one party told their story, interestingly, it was a dispute where we had a man and a woman on the other side. As the woman told her story, my co-mediator, who was a woman, started shedding tears. Now, that alone was already an indication of some degree of bias. And the only thing I could do was, as an experienced mediator, was to call a recess. And by the time we came from the recess, I informed the parties that my co-mediator had elected to drop out of the process, having expressed such bias. Now, you may think this is not a big deal. It is. When parties are in a dispute, their minds are all over the place, and they have to be careful. You have to be careful how you manage things like that. Then conflict of interest is also another factor that you must be careful about. A conflict of interest issue may arise where a mediator's personal or professional relationship could compromise their impartiality. So mediators must disclose any potential conflict and, if necessary, recuse themselves from the process. An example of possible conflict of interest is where a mediator who has a financial stake in the outcome of a commercial dispute decides to take on such a matter. That will be a serious breach of conflict of interest principle. Then breach of confidentiality. Of course, this speaks for itself. Confidentiality, as we know, and as stated earlier on, is a cornerstone of mediation. And any breach of such confidentiality can erode trust in the process. You see, one unique thing about mediation is that whilst, for instance, parties, let's say, compare a mediator to a judge, while the judge is empowered by state and is in position by virtue of statute, the mediator is in position by virtue of the confidence of parties. Even where a third party, for instance, a judge has referred parties to mediation and the parties have agreed to participate in that mediation, parties have given their consent based on the belief that their issues will be confidentially handled. So the mediator must be extremely careful in doing that. And an example of such a breach could be a mediator accidentally sharing details of a family mediation session with an external party while violating the privacy of the participants. And an interesting thing to note is that you may do this and think that is no way that the parties may get to know, but you see, the world is such a small place. These things have a way of coming around. And then, of course, lastly, manipulation or coercion by mediators. Mediators must avoid any form of manipulation or coercion that could pressure parties into accepting an agreement against their will. One of the ways for the mediator to safeguard and protect themselves against making such a mistake is for the mediator to remember that the responsibility to reach a settlement belongs to the parties. It doesn't belong to the mediator. So the responsibility to reach a settlement is that of the parties. And that is why some of us as practitioners who have argued that the role of the mediator and remuneration for a mediator should be based not on the outcome, not on the fact that parties settle, but on the time that the mediator has put in. And that's why when I charge fees in mediation, for instance, I charge based either on per session or per hour, as the case may be, or per day. I usually refrain from getting involved in fees that relate to anything that would put me under pressure of trying to make sure that the parties reach a settlement at all costs, because that is not your work. Your work is to provide the opportunity for parties to communicate, your work is to provide the opportunity for parties to open up, but it is the parties' responsibility to reach their settlement when they are ready to arrive at that settlement. So those are the ethical challenges that, some of the typical ethical challenges that a mediator must be aware of, must be conscious of, and must work hard to avoid. Now, I'll quickly talk about 2 case studies of some global ethical dilemmas that are available, that are out there in our real world. So to illustrate the real world impact of the ethical challenges we've talked about, these 2 case scenarios have been presented. First one is mediator favoring a party due to personal bias. And now, all of these are hypothetical. So please take them in that context, that they're hypothetical. So imagine in an international commercial mediation, a mediator was found to have a close personal relationship with one of the parties, which influenced their conduct during the process. The mediator consistently allowed the favored party more speaking time and dismissed the concerns of the other party as not particularly germane. This breach of impartiality led to an unfair outcome and damaged the credibility of the mediation process. You see, one major thing why ethical considerations and upholding ethical considerations is so important in mediation is when you breach the ethics, you, the mediator, you have created a problem for yourself. So the parties view you in bad light. The parties will also view the institution holding you out. So in this case, for instance, ICMC, they will view ICMC in bad light. The parties will also view the process of mediation in bad light. So if we want this area of professional practice to thrive and to grow, we must uphold the best standards and avoid anything that gives the impression that we are allowing sentiments, bias, personal bias, and so on to come to play. Then, of course, another interesting case scenario is the leakage of sensitive information in, say, cross-border disputes. So hypothetically, again, in a cross-border dispute involving intellectual property, sensitive information shared during mediation was leaked to the media, causing significant reputational and financial harm to one of the parties. The breach of confidentiality was traced back to the mediator's failure to secure digital communication channels, highlighting the importance of robust data protection measures in modern mediation practice. Why is this important? Why is it important to highlight this? In this world now, most of us are tech-driven. A lot of what we do is online. I mean, we are holding this webinar online. I understand that we have participants joining from all over the world. So imagine that you are conducting a mediation session and then certain sensitive information has been put out. And because you haven't put together a robust technology that protects your information, protects your online presence, protects the data that is there carefully, and that information slips out, that could result in serious damage to the parties. And of course, any damage to the parties will damage you as a practitioner, will damage the institution that holds you out, and also damage our profession, our cherished profession of mediation. Then I now come to a comparative analysis of ethical issues in mediation, and we'll look at a few jurisdictions. We'll start with England. Now, England has a well-established mediation framework, particularly in commercial and family disputes. However, just like we mentioned earlier on, ethical challenges can arise, and they do arise, especially in high-profile cases where stakes are high and the public scrutiny is intense. And I'll give you two examples. One, ethical issues of impartiality in high-profile commercial mediation. So impartiality is a cornerstone of mediation, as we've talked about, but in a high-profile commercial disputes, mediators may face challenges in maintaining neutrality, especially if they have prior relationship with one of the parties. Although the mediator disclosed this relationship, questions about impartiality persisted throughout the process, highlighting the importance of transparency and the need for mediators to avoid even the appearance of bias. So we are enjoined that when we are appointed as mediators, to make sure that we disclose any relationship, no matter how tenuous, no matter how you think it's insignificant, do that, especially for many of us who are practitioners who are either in the same profession, either we have done the matter together as lawyers. For instance, I have, as Joshua introduced, I had the privilege of being chairman of the Bar Association here in the FCT many years ago. Now, in that regard, sometimes when I'm appointed mediator in a matter, as I walk into the room or as the parties come into the room, counsel for both parties many a times are people that know me. And so I do not take it for granted. So you hear some of them refer to, chairman, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Or now, I haven't served as president of the institute. Presido, good afternoon. I usually would then take the time to explain to the parties to say, I, prior to now, was chairman of the Bar Association. In that regard, I've related with these people professionally, but with respect to this particular dispute, I know nothing about the issues in dispute. I have no interest in it, and I'm not aware of why the parties have come before me. The same would apply if I were to explain the fact that I had been president of ICMC. And maybe in the course of the process, I've inducted so many people in the past. Sometimes people come and say, oh, President, let me take a picture with you. So somebody may see a picture. So I put all those things out there so that nobody will say, oh, there was a relationship which was not disclosed, and because of that, that now harms the process. Then the issue of confidentiality in family mediation, another ethical issue. Family mediation, particularly in child custody cases, requires a delicate balance between transparency and privacy. Mediators must ensure that sensitive information remains confidential while also complying with legal obligations to protect the welfare of children. So an example, for instance, is the case of Reedy Children 2010, where a family mediation involving the child custody arrangements, in the family mediation involving child custody arrangement, the mediator faced an ethical dilemma when one parent disclosed information about potential harm to the child. The mediator had to navigate the tension between maintaining the confidentiality and fulfilling their duty to report the risk to the child's welfare. So these are the delicate balance that sometimes that you find in our work as mediators. And this is the experience from England. Let's now move on to the USA. In the USA, they also have a robust mediation system, which is used in the workplace and also in commercial mediation and indeed in online mediation. The ethical issue there, for instance, is the mediator's neutrality in a workplace dispute. Now, the mediator neutrality is critical in workplace disputes, particularly in cases involving sensitive issues like racial discrimination. So allegations of bias can undermine trust in the mediation process and lead to unfair outcomes. And I've given a reference to a case there and also the American Bar Association Code of Ethics. So for instance, I'm Black and I've been appointed mediator, and in the mediation is a workplace dispute where one party has been accused of discrimination against the other in terms of race-related issues. The mediator must be careful in how he or she navigates that to ensure that they are not drawn into the murky waters of the dispute between the parties. Then another ethical issue is the matter of informed consent in online dispute. And I'm happy to say that as an institute, we have, for those who do not know, we have our ODR platform, the ICMC Online Dispute Resolution Platform. And that's where the issue of informed consent in online mediation comes in. And this is a very major issue, for instance, in the US. With the rise of online mediation, ensuring informed consent has become a critical ethical issue. Parties must fully understand the virtual mediation process, including its benefits, limitations, and potential risks before agreeing to participate, because there will always be a risk, and you need to put the parties, bring them up to speed. And the duty that that mediators have is to always make sure that you disclose. Once you disclose and you put the information out there and you provide the parties enough information that helps their decision-making, whether to participate or otherwise, you have performed your duty, and that's good enough. And then the next jurisdiction is Singapore, another jurisdiction where they're doing wonderful things in mediation. In fact, as of today, I think Singapore outclasses most other jurisdictions as far as the growth and the practice of mediation is concerned. Now, the ethical issue that you will find in a country like mediation, for instance, in Singapore, for instance, is the cultural sensitivity in multi-ethnic disputes. Singapore society is multi-ethnic, so similar to our own dear Nigeria. So Singapore's multicultural society requires mediators to be highly sensitive in cultural norms and practices. Misunderstanding or disregarding cultural differences can lead to mistrust and ineffective mediation outcomes. An example, for instance, would be in a community mediation case involving a dispute between neighbors of different ethnic backgrounds. The mediator failed to recognize the cultural significance of a religious practice raised by one party. This oversight led to frustration and a breakdown in communication as the party felt their values were not respected. The case highlights the importance of cultural competence in mediation. At ICMC, for instance, our trainings, when we hold our trainings, on Fridays, we leave out, the break time is structured in such a way that it allows enough time for our Muslim brothers to go have their prayers and then have their lunch before we continue with classes. When I have conducted mediation, which involves, for instance, Muslim brothers, I've always made sure that if we're going to fix a time, is either we'll fix the time in such a way that it also takes into consideration those issues. So those kind of sensitivity are very important. If you are not careful, you will be, of course, breaching your ethical considerations as it relates to the parties. Another ethical issue it's popular in Singapore is the issue of competence in commercial mediation. So Singapore's position as a global financial and trade hub means that mediators often handle complex commercial disputes, including those involving international trade. Mediators who handle such matters must possess specialized knowledge and expertise to effectively assist the parties in those circumstances. Now let's come back home to Nigeria. Nigeria's mediation practices are deeply rooted in traditional and community-based dispute resolution systems. However, ethical challenges such as power dynamics and corruption can undermine the fairness and integrity of the mediation process. And I've highlighted two examples. One, power dynamics in community mediation. In Nigeria, community mediation often involves traditional leaders and elders who hold significant influence. Mediators must navigate these power dynamics carefully to ensure that all parties, especially marginalized individuals, are treated fairly and have equal voice in the process. So imagine in a land dispute, for instance, in a land dispute mediation in a rural community, the mediator consistently deferred to the opinions of the village elders, disregarding the concerns of younger parties who lacked social status. Of course, that is going to naturally result in dissatisfaction, and then the mediator would be liable or guilty of having breached their ethical responsibility. Then corruption and bribery in mediation process. Corruption and bribery are significant challenges in Nigeria, and mediation is not immune to these practices. Mediators must resist any form of undue influence, including gifts or financial incentives, to maintain integrity in the process. I have actually faced circumstances where parties had, while the mediation process was going on, tried to make me gifts. And of course, I clearly stated to them it was unacceptable. Now, an interesting question that may cross the minds of some people is, what if the gifts are at the end of the process? Even in that circumstances, what I have always done is to insist that the parties jointly present the gift, or that the gift you present must be with the knowledge and the consent of the other parties. What is important is always keep this in mind. In some culture, and this is specific, this may be unique to us in Nigeria, because in some culture, you cannot even touch the gift at all. But because in Nigeria, we have a culture of gifts, we have a culture of saying thank you, you must also be sensitive to our cultural nuances in managing things of that nature. So keep that in mind, distinguished colleagues, as you navigate your practice of mediation. So how do we address these ethical issues in mediation, and what are the strategies that the mediator must take into consideration? First, the first strategy, because I'm out of time now, I'm just going to run through this, but these are basic things that most of you already know. The first strategy is enhancing training and education on ethics, like what we are doing today, providing more awareness for our colleagues. I'm sure that if I were to ask Joshua to conduct a poll, how many of our members have read the Code of Ethics of the Institute recently, and how many of us have it close at hand? I'm sure that very few people will confirm that they have done that. Secondly, is establishing clear guidelines and conduct and codes of conduct. This is very important that we do that. So every institution, and ICMC has been doing that and will continue to do that, to establish the clear guidelines. So it's not enough to enhance the training and education. You also must establish the clear guidelines. Simple things like, as we teach in communication skills, even being conscious about how you manage space between you and parties, and all that in, say, caucusing can be an important factor which may raise an ethical problem or may help you to address those issues. So it's very important to set the boundaries. It helps you to set boundaries. Implementing supervision and accountability measures or mechanisms is also a very important way of ensuring strategy. So having mediators, for instance, report any challenges or peculiar situations that they may have encountered, having mediators provide a log as to where parties have misconducted themselves, either by attempting to, and parties can misconduct themselves, by attempting to bribe you, corrupt you. In one of the mediations that I did, when a party attempted to offer me a gift, what I did was to ask them to bring it to the next mediation session. And at the mediation session, I invited them to please present the gift in the presence of the other party. I can assure you that they found it very discomforting, and they were not very happy to do that. Promoting cultural competence and sensitivity. So it's important that as you go, as you navigate and you conduct your work, provide yourself knowledge about the cultural nuances, about the different places. I have had the privilege of doing some work locally and internationally, where I'm appointed to undertake mediation that involves parties who are of a different background than Nigeria. One of the things I've done is to do some homework as to what are the cultural nuances in those places. If I'm going to Sierra Leone, for instance, I want to check what are the cultural nuances in that place, and what are the sensitivities. It's always very important that you do that. So as mediators, we must promote those things, and as an institution, we must also promote that. And then using technology ethically in mediation, ensuring data security, and so on and so forth is very important. Ensuring that only those who should be in the room, for instance, are in the room. This is always very important in making sure that you address ethical issues in mediation. Now, of course, in addressing ethical issues in mediation, what is the role of institutions and governments? The role of institutions and government is to help develop ethical standards and accreditation systems. For instance, at ICMC, we have developed our own a code of ethics. We have been pushing for many years now the bill for the passage before the National Assembly and assent by the executive, which will provide a sort of like a best practice standard across Nigeria on how mediation should be handled and so on and so forth. And we'll invite government to please partner with the Institute and with other stakeholders in promoting that. Then encouraging transparency and accountability in the mediation process, particularly when you are dealing with government agencies, MDAs, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, companies. And then, of course, lastly, providing resources for ethical dilemma in resolution. It's important that we provide trainings and resources and a system where when people are confronted with an ethical dilemma, they can take steps, they can approach the issue. So for instance, as a practitioner, if I find myself in a difficult situation, I mean, today we have a mentorship system where many of our colleagues are encouraged to reach out to some of us who have trained them over the years to say, if you have this ethical situation or dilemma, please contact us. But we can go further as an institute to set up a desk where if people have ethical challenges or dilemma, without giving the details of the parties that you are dealing with, or even being too specific, you can just say, I have this ethical challenge. I need some guidance on how to navigate those issues. So those will help us in a long way to go forward. Now, what are the policy considerations and what recommendations do I make in that regard? Well, with regards to policy considerations, I would say the first thing I would encourage us to do is to start by encouragement and caution. Encouragement is a way of ensuring that mediators are encouraged to observe the best standards, encouraged to keep the values that they have been trained to uphold, and of course, to caution them to always maintain the right behavior whenever they are dealing with parties. When I had the opportunity of being chairman of the disciplinary committee and the ethics committee of the Institute, we did not have any issue where we had to either strike out the name of a member or suspend the member, because we try to be proactive in our engagement with members to provide them such guidance, encouragement, and caution, which to a great extent helped many of our members stay on board. Then structural measures can be taken. Some programs may employ structural measures in assisting mediators with addressing ethical concerns. That's what I talked about. Like, how do you identify situations where parties are trying to corrupt you, for instance? How do you stay alive to situations? How do you navigate a situation where a party is trying to offer you or draw you into something that you should not do? And then finally, training, promoting training and upholding the best standards will also go a long way to ensure that ethical standards and ethical considerations are at the forefront of the mind of the mediator. In conclusion, in order for the mediator to keep its promise, for mediation to keep its promise for the future, its benefits should be supported by the ranks of practitioners and policymakers. So all of us must put our hands on board, on deck, to move this forward. This paper or presentation, I hope, offers the insight or input of practitioners on the issues of ethical dilemma which is posed by mediation. It is now time for policymakers, such as yourself, every one of us is a policymaker, to embrace how we can work hard to make sure that these ethical standards are best preserved and the journey starts with yourself. If you do it properly yourself, other people will also embrace those standards without more. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of this presentation, and I'm now open to whatever questions that you may have. Thank you very much. Joshua, are you there?
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful presentation from you on ethical consideration for mediators. So quickly, we already have a lot of comments and questions in the chat box. If you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature so I can allow you to unmute your mic, or you drop your question in the chat box. The first question is coming from Ifeoma Konwea. Good day, everyone. So I have two questions. How can mediators ensure they are culturally competent and sensitive to the diverse backgrounds of the parties involved? And secondly, how can mediators maintain impartiality and neutrality when utilizing online platforms that may influence the dynamics of communication between parties? So we have the question in the chat box in case you want to get it done.
All right. So I'll take that question quickly, and then as you gather the others. I think that the first one is how does the mediator maintain cultural competence and sensitivity? As I said earlier on, the first thing to do when I am appointed a mediator, so I speak from experience, when I'm appointed a mediator, the first thing that I have done over the years is to do some background study on the nature of the people who I am going to be assisting in mediation. What's their background? Where are they from? I've had the opportunity, for instance, to give an example of doing some work in the Niger Delta many years ago, where you had to mediate between some of the people in the creeks. Now, a simple thing that many of us did at that time, myself and some of my colleagues with whom, was that typically, as you see me now, I'm wearing a suit, a tie, jacket, and for those of you who know me, most of the time when you see me in such formals, doing such mediation work, that is the way I would be dressed. But because of the cultural sensitivity of the nature of the people we were dealing with, we went in T-shirts and jeans so that we could blend with the people that we were this thing, because you needed to be able to present yourself in a way that the people could also accept you. So that's a very important thing to keep at the back of your mind. Many years ago, I also had the privilege of doing some work in Sierra Leone with the political parties prior to the election, and as it related to the transition. Now, one of the things that we discovered in that circumstance was that I did, based on the study we did, we found out, my team and myself found out that in Sierra Leone, color was a big issue for them. So in coming to the process, I couldn't wear a tie when I engaged with the parties in the meetings that we had. Why? Because I found out that each of the political party was color-coded, either red, yellow, green, blue. And when I looked in my bag, those were the colors that I had. So to avoid a situation where I would appear with the tie and seemingly inadvertently appear to have identified with a particular political party, it was wiser not to wear any tie at all. And I told them that story. And interestingly, in presenting that story to the parties, that helped me also break the ice and made the parties aware that this team of mediators were also culturally sensitive to their differences. Now, the second question is on the use of online resources and how we will, how do you maintain, can you remind me, is it neutrality, Joshua?
Yes.
How do you maintain?
Yes, maintain impartiality and neutrality when utilizing online platforms.
Very well. So the first thing is to set a guideline. And if for those who have used our ICMC ODR platform, which I had the privilege to launch when I was president, if you look at it, we have a guidelines on the conditionalities for you to join in the first place, things that you must do and things that you cannot do. So within the framework of such institutional setup, it's easy to maintain such neutrality and impartiality. But if your process is an ad hoc one, then it is wise to document for the parties and agree with them how the process will be conducted, what will be allowed. So for instance, in a typical mediation where you are with parties physically, you would have ground rules on who can speak, when they can speak, interruption, and so on. You have ground rules on who can be in the room. So even in the online system, you can have such ground rules. A typical one will be that everybody's camera must be on so that we can see everybody who is in the room. Another typical one will be that everybody is muted unless the mediator permits you to unmute and all that. So, and then you could also assign time. Another way to use the online platform is to create meeting rooms for caucusing so that you do not have everybody in the same room at the same time. Where you need to caucus and hold private meetings with parties, you separate parties in such a way that whatever happens in one room is confidential, and only the mediator must be the administrator in such circumstance, thereby safeguarding preventing a situation of abuse by the party. So in sum, those are quick answers to that, those two questions.
Thank you so much, sir. There's a comment from the past registrar of the Institute. I would like to recognize him, Professor Elachi. Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Did you say
great presentation?
No, you have identified my teacher wrongly. First vice president of the institute, not past registrar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
That's
Thank
my
you
teacher, Professor Lagunju.
Oh, that's great.
Good afternoon, sir.
He's saying great presentation in terms of confidentiality in multi-party disputes such as community and intercommunal disputes. It may a big challenge. Therefore, one has to be extra creative in managing the process in terms of communication management. Thank you so much, Prof. And another question from Dr. Barada is asking, can you take your fee in kind? For instance, on a land dispute, a party does not have money. I want to give a parcel of land for your fee. Can you take your fee in kind?
I would not do that. And I think that it would be unethical to take your fees in kind. If the parties do not have money, and it would be wiser for them to put up that parcel of land for sale and then pay you this thing. Because once you do that, then the mediator, in my view, others may have a different view, but in my view, the mediator has now become interested in the subject matter of the dispute. And that would be completely unethical in my view.
Thank you, sir. So, Gloria, your hand is raised. Can you unmute your mic now? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please confirm that I can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Leonard, for a well-delivered paper. I have two questions, one more or less a suggestion, though. So when you were taking the competence and professionalism under the mediation principles, you said something about standards, and you talked about counseling and mediation. At the same time, you're mediating and counseling. But oftentimes, once it's family mediation, you find out intervals, you are mediating and then you're counseling. I want to find out, is it wrong? Because that's actually what happens in practice, especially when it's a family mediation. That's one. Then the second is talking about gifts. If we make it part of our ground rules from the beginning, we set it out, no gifts, or if there will be any gifts at the end, it should be from both parties. Would that be wrong to do? Just thinking aloud, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll start with the second question. Excellent strategy. That's why we talked about setting guidelines and boundaries. Once you put it in your first meeting that parties, gifts, either no gifts, or if there must be gifts, they must be done collectively or with the consent of the other party, that settles it. So, because what you want to avoid is, see, the mediator rides on parties' confidence. You ride on the trust of the parties in your ability to be neutral, impartial, and to handle them fairly. Anything that suggests otherwise will affect you. So that is what you want to keep in mind. So once you do that, you've solved the problem. That's a good strategy. In terms of counseling and mediation, the distinction is this. When you counsel people, basic counseling has you usually either suggesting outcomes to the parties or sometimes doing a bit of what we call advising the parties. Once you're doing that, you are no longer mediating. Now, I understand the dilemma that we face sometimes when we're doing things like family mediation. So the mediator must be able to draw the line. That's why we say that it's a skill. So you must be able to find ways to help the parties track resources like counseling without being the counselor yourself, if what you are doing is mediation. Because what you want to be careful about is a situation where the parties say, oh, I agreed to this because the mediator is the one who told me. As you know, the principle of self-determination of party, the principle of party autonomy is what guides mediation. One fundamental principle that parties feel a sense of ownership when they reach the solution by themselves. So if they feel that you were the ones who decided for them, it may affect their commitment at the end of the day. So that's the balance between the two. Counseling is very close to mediation, but it is not the same thing as mediation. And I will advise that mediators are careful not to. What you could do is there are ways that you could also, in the process of mediation, well, you could ask questions. So rather than suggest to the parties, what I have done in the past is to ask questions that help to lead the parties to discover the answers by themselves. We don't have enough time for me to illustrate here, but for those who have had the opportunity of, I've had the opportunity of training, I have demonstrated this in some of the classes in the past. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. This is coming from Anthony. Is it unethical to advertise as mediator and send proposals on your services to persons or institutions that may require mediation?
No, it is not unethical. What would be unethical is to make representations that are not true. So, for instance, you have not, you put in the proposal that you have handled 1,000 mediations. Meanwhile, you have only seen 5. That would be unethical. You put in the proposal that you've done international mediation when you haven't done any international mediation. That would be unethical. But there's nothing unethical in presenting your services, because it is only by presenting your services that people become aware of what you do. My experience, however, and I want to say this with every sense of responsibility, is my experience is that your greatest market usually comes by word of mouth. How well you handled your last mediation and how well the parties felt satisfied many times will be the reason why you get appointed again. Only yesterday, I got a call from someone saying that they had been referred to me and they wanted to appoint me as mediator based on a mediation that I did 7 years ago. I didn't even remember. They had to provide me more details, particulars for me to remember that there was such ever such a mediation in the past. So it's very important. Once you uphold these ethical principles and standards that we're talking about, people will gravitate towards you naturally.
Thank you. And Ope Ogunib, can you take your question, please?
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for an insightful lecture. My question is, yes, what are the ethical responsibilities of a mediator when they believe that that the agreement reached by the parties is in best interest, is not in the best interest of one of the parties or more? Do we just simply let it go, or do we have a moral obligation to help, balance the terms of the agreement?
Okay. Remember that, thank you for that question, an interesting one at that. But remember that when we teach mediation, one of the things we've said is that parties typically, the problem belongs to the parties, so the outcome should belong to the parties. Now, your understanding of fairness may not be the same as the parties interpret it. So do you have an ethical responsibility to ensure that at the end of the day, parties reach an outcome which is mutually beneficial? Yes, you do. That's important enough. Do you have an ethical responsibility to ensure that the agreement is sort of balanced? Yes. But what is that balance? And that's now the tricky part of it. For a party, an apology may be all that they need, whilst another party wants money. So in an arrangement where you find two people and they, in reaching a settlement, one of them says that, there's a story that we share constantly in the trainings. Let me just quickly do that. Maybe that will help. So you have, for instance, a dispute involving real estate, a family where a lady and her brothers are fighting over the estate. She's the oldest, so she's been made the custodian of the family property and all that. And then her brothers have been incited by some people to say, because she's a woman, she cannot have the authority of exercising that control over the property. And there's a lot of battle. They've gone to court. And then fortunately, the judge before which the matter goes is a mediator and referred the parties to mediation. This is a family issue. Go and look at this issue. In mediation, to cut a long story short, at some point, when the boys realized what was key to her, all she was interested in is for them to recognize her role as the matriarch of the family, as the most senior person. It was immaterial whether she was male or female, that was the most, that was it. And once they gave her that respect, and the boys, because they were far junior to her, she had been born maybe like 15 years before any of them came. Once they prostrated and said, Mommy, we are sorry, she got up and shared the property for them, retaining nothing for herself. For her, what was important is recognition of her position as the head of the family. For them, what they got was, so looking at it as and that's why we say mediation is not about rights, it's about interests, it's about needs, it's about fears, it's about concerns. If you look at it as an outsider, you think that this is not a balanced arrangement, but it is balanced as far as the parties are concerned. So that's as far as you must be careful. The last thing I'll say is that if you feel strongly that the parties could probably have reached a different outcome, maybe if you are skillful enough, you can do what we call a bit of reality check to make sure that the parties understand what they have committed themselves to. That is the most you can do. Anything other than that will be you descending into the arena. And it's not your problem. It belongs to the parties. I hope that's clear enough.
Thank you so much, sir. There are a lot of questions coming, but we'll just take 2 more questions because of our time. This question is coming from Mrs. Aline Kalu. In a situation where one of the parties shoulders the mediation fee, will it be illicit impartiality or be a ground of alleged impartiality?
Okay. Now, first of all, by practice and principle, parties share the fees equally. But remember that typically you will have the opportunity in the preparation phase to engage with the parties and agree on some of these things. So if in the preparation phase, the parties agree in that first meeting that you have with them, whether it is online, physical, or otherwise, that they do not mind that one party bears the cost of the mediation, then so be it. That party, the other party cannot raise that as a challenge later, but it must be something agreed by the parties. Many years ago, when we used to do some work for Shell, matters involving Shell and the communities, Shell typically paid for the mediation. But at the beginning, it was understood clearly among the parties that even though the parties ought to pay the fees together, because most of the time the dispute was between Shell and the communities, and it's usually the communities will be in the position where they say they don't have money. And Shell was interested in the resolution of the matters. Parties reached an understanding, and it was documented that the parties have agreed that the fees of the mediator will be borne, and the expense of the mediator will be borne by by one party. In some cases involving a husband and wife, for instance, you could have a situation where the man is the one who has money, or in some cases it's the woman who has money, the other doesn't have money, but their parties are interested in resolving the matter in mediation. They can reach an agreement that the one who has money should pay the cost. I have had several mediations where the payment was made by one party, but that agreement must be arrived at the very beginning. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Samuel, your hand is raised. Please, can you ask your question?
Yeah, well, I simply wanted to introduce myself, announce that I'm listening to this webinar from Nairobi. I must say I have learned quite a bit, very, very well presented, and I'm glad that I was able to join. Thank you very much for the info. I think Nigeria sounds to me like they've advanced quite a bit in the mediation process, and the existence of the ICMC in Nigeria as an institution, I think is testament to that. I'm very, very happy that I was able to join the webinar.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Those are very kind words, and they're truly appreciated. Yeah.
So if you would like to reach out to Dr. Agada Elachi, SAN, you can send your question to him on LinkedIn. You can also follow him on LinkedIn for further engagement. So once again, I would like to say a very big thank you to our immediate past president. It's been always wonderful to have you today. Quickly, I would like to take some few announcements regarding our forthcoming trainings from of the Institute. But before then, I would like to remind all our members regarding the renewal of membership. And this comes with several benefits of internship opportunities, life membership for fellows of the Institute who are interested in one-time payment to become a life member of the Institute. Other benefits include discounts on our continuing professional development courses. There's welfare package at the branch level, volunteer mediation scheme, and also a webinar like this for all our members. So this is to encourage all our members to renew their membership. Thank you. And tomorrow we'll be having negotiation techniques and strategies for out-of-court settlements. It's a 5 CPD unit course, and on the 28th, we'll be having cultural dilemmas in negotiation and mediation. For members, it's 50,000, and for non-members, is 70,000. We encourage all our members to also take advantage of this continuing professional development for upgrade from one cadre of membership to the other. And coming next is the Mediation Skills Accreditation and Certification course holding virtually, scheduled for 7th to 11th of April on Zoom. We encourage you to share this with your friends, colleagues, to participate in this coming course. Once again, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all our participants, our guest speaker, distinguished Dr. Agada Elachi, SAN. Thank you so much for being part of this insightful session. Once again, have a good evening.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, everybody, and have a pleasant day, rest of the day. Thank you.
Yeah.